Hello, everyone. This is JT Keating, the Vice President of Product Strategy here at Zimperium. We'd like to thank everybody for joining us for another of our webinars. Really looking forward to this one. This one's fun for me in a weird kind of way, and she'll explain. But before we dive in, we'll do the usual perfunctory comments. Obviously, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to field questions at the tail end of the session. We try to keep these to 20, 25 minutes of content max, and then whatever questions you have. And if people don't have questions, then we'll release you early. We're not going to force you to stay around for dead air. If you have any questions, put it in the Q&A. Also, we've disabled the chat capability because we're having trouble with it. So even if you have technical difficulties, just please throw that in the Q&A section. Of course, the archived version of the webinar will be up within a day or so. And if anybody is interested in the slides, we can make that available as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to dive in. I mean, one of the questions a lot of times people will say is they'll be like, well, I mean, how do we know that what are the threats and are they really happening, right? That's kind of the thing. And largely that's driven by a very simple fact, and that very simple fact is that the vast majority of the devices, the endpoints, the mobile devices that are out there today have no visibility on them whatsoever. And since they have no visibility on them whatsoever, then a lot of people don't see it. Well, we do. We get to see that. So we're going to dive in. It's going to be fun. We're going to run through the different types of attacks using real-world examples from our customer base here at Zimperium. We literally have tens of millions of devices around the world, hundreds and hundreds of enterprise customers, thousands of customers overall. So we see a lot of things. And we just wanted to give you a little bit of a snapshot, just a little bit of a feel for some of them to give you a little bit of an idea. And this will feed into a webinar we're doing next week, which is why do the hackers want your devices in the first place? What are the top 5 reasons hackers want mobile devices? What can they do with them? And you'll start to get a little bit of a feel for it here. So before we actually go down and start playing with the trees, I actually grew up in Lake Tahoe, a ski area. We used to talk about, kissing bark all the time. Of course, that was when we were skiing. We'd run into trees. But with the infamous trees, let's take one look at the forest, because I want everybody to kind of get baseline before we dive into the individual trees of the different threats that are hitting people. So what is the forest? This is the forest. 100% of our customers detect threats. So if a company is sitting there and saying, well, we're not sure if we're actually being attacked, we're not sure if our mobile devices are at risk, the simple answer is they are. You just don't have any visibility on them, as I was mentioning, to be able to go out there. So as we get into this, and we're going to start talking about that oak tree, we're going to talk about that cedar tree. Nobody likes cedar trees except for when it's burning, but that's a different story. Realize this, keep this in mind. 100% of our customers across those tens of millions of endpoints detect mobile threats. So couple just kind of setup things, because it's important as we kind of dive into it. The main thing that everybody is really coming to the realization of, last year people started getting this, now it's just a fact, right? An endpoint's an endpoint's an endpoint. If I've got patient or cardholder or any confidential data, maybe client data if you're a law firm, if I've got it sitting on a laptop, it's no different than if I have it sitting on a tablet. If the data and the access to on those devices are the same, it doesn't matter. An endpoint is an endpoint is an endpoint. And so I need to be able to protect those endpoints against attacks. So what are the actual mobile attacks? Well, there's 4 big buckets. And I'm going to come back and I'm going to talk about a kind of a variation, a fun thing that we've been doing with this. There's 4 main attacks on mobile. Going right to left is predominantly in terms of the importance, okay? On the right side, malicious apps. Because all apps are in containers, their own little buckets on mobile, an app by itself, the only thing it can really do by itself in its own little bucket is conduct fraud. That's what we see. And I'm going to go through an example of one of those here pretty quick. it can be used as a delivery mechanism to go all the way to the left to get to the ultimate objective, which is compromising the device. The ultimate objective on mobile is you need to compromise the device. You need to elevate privileges, because in that case, you're sitting above the buckets, above the containers, and you can actually do things across applications. An application by itself can't do that. I think the other key part is malicious apps by definition are untargeted. When we move to the next one, and I'm going to talk about these as well in each individual detail, phishing sites, it's also untargeted, okay? And again, it can be used to deliver an exploit to break out of it, but as a general rule, they are both untargeted. They send out a blast and you see who's actually going to pick it. Zimperium from the very beginning has always been built to protect enterprises, which is why we have hundreds and hundreds of enterprises that are being protected by us. The bad guys are bad people, but they're very good at what they do, and they're very efficient. If, as I've said on some of these other webinars, if somebody is targeting XYZ bank, they are not going to drop an app in the App Store or send out a phishing email and pray somebody from that bank actually downloads or clicks on it. What they're going to do is they're going to do a network attack. They're going to put up a fake Wi-Fi network, and we'll give you some examples of this here, or do a man-in-the-middle attack until they find somebody from XYZ bank. Then they're going to use that information that they have from controlling the network to be able to elevate privileges and compromise the device. 90% of the targeted attacks that we see start with a network attack because it is the most efficient way to get to the end game, which is compromising the device. So, quick word about Zimperium, because it'll help set up the story. You need to understand the technology a little bit that's in here, but this is not a product pitch. This is strictly for setup. As I've said before, BMW and Honda, they're not car companies, they're engine companies. They put their engine in a whole bunch of different things. Zimperium is an engine company. We have one core engine that is a machine learning based engine that has been trained up in the lab against billions of data points from those tens of millions of devices we've talked about. But it's trained up there, but it does all of its detection, machine learning based detection on device against the 4 primary attack vectors I was just talking about. Why does that matter? Well, it matters because, as I just mentioned, 9 out of 10 of the targeted attacks start with a network attack, which means 9 out of 10 targeted attacks, the bad guy controls the network. So Zimperium from the very beginning said, we cannot rely on a cloud lookup for our detection. We need to train all the way up in the cloud and the lab and all that, but our detection has to be on device so we can defend ourselves even when the bad guys own the network. So Z9 is one core engine that can do 0-day detection of malicious threats on device. It can be deployed out in one of 2 ways. If you are trying to protect your device 100% of the time, and the data that's on that device 100% of the time, basically next generation endpoint protection for mobile, you would use a product of ours called Zips, or a white labeled version that we've done with some of our partners. You're protecting the device 100% of the time, the data 100% of the time. The examples I'm going to run you through right now are all from Zips, when we're actively protecting our enterprises. If, however, you have a mobile app and you say, you know what, I want to be able to know what is the nature of the environment I'm putting this mobile app on, you can use a software development kit, an SDK we have called ZApp for in-app protection. And it takes all of that detection capability of Z9, that engine that we just produced, and it puts it directly in the mobile app in a matter of minutes. And now you have visibility into that endpoint. But in that case, you're not trying to protect the device 100% of the time. What you're trying to do is you're trying to protect the session and the app itself. So an example that we've done some webinars on this. We've got multiple customers, but one that's an easy example to explain the difference. We have a major banking customer who is using Zips to protect employees, but it's using ZApp to protect its mobile banking users. So it's an example of being able to do both. Both of those come into our console. One of the major advantages of doing all your detection on device is you don't have to lock your console, your management console, into your detection source like you do if you're doing cloud-based detection. So you could put our console on any cloud. You could put our console on-prem if you wanted to. Behind Z console is a capability called Z3A. That is advanced app analysis There's malicious apps, which are automatically detected by Z9, but then there's leaky or risky apps, apps that are in your environment that, mobile apps are basically Legos. You click them together and you put them out. So when developers are behind, they run out and grab a library, they run out and grab an SDK, just throw it in. What they might not know is, even though it's a perfectly legitimate app, one of those libraries might be sending traffic to a foreign country. One of those might be putting things into plain text. One of those things might be stripping SSL, whatever the case may be. Z3A will help you identify every single app and what are the security and privacy risks of those apps, even if they're legitimate. Then we tie in on the ZIPS case, on the protected device case, to the largest set of EMMs. We're the only ones that can do multiple EMMs. We actually are embedded inside a mobile iron. So in mobile iron's case, mobile iron MTD, you can detect and remediate on device in one agent instead of working together. And then we can take all that data down, and we have got the most forensics data, and we can put it in a SIM. So end of product. That was more just to kind of explain what I'm about to get into. Let's get into the actual attacks. So what I've done is, I mentioned we have this fun thing that we've been doing where we can very academically talk about the fact that there are malicious apps and phishing attacks and network attacks and device compromises. Well, when you go and talk to most people, that's a little dry and they don't really understand it. Especially when you're going out and talking to the end users. Let's say bank XYZ buys our solution, then they're explaining to their employees what it is that this thing is, talking academically and talking security-wise, about daemon anomalies. It's like nobody knows what the heck that is. So instead, what we did for fun is we said, look, the reality is there's all these threats that are out there in and around your mobile devices, and they're out there and they're all the time. So what we did is we started having fun putting some personality to the attacks. So we even did whole webinars on this last year on the mobile menaces. They're little creatures that are running around, wreaking havoc. And we actually took those 4 primary categories and put them into 7 mobile menaces. And we actually took them from the least dangerous of the 7, still dangerous, but the least dangerous, which are those leaky apps I was just talking about with Z3A, all the way down to the most dangerous, most wanted number 1, which is an OS exploit. In that case, somebody has more control over your device than you do. So I decided just to use those guys for fun when we do this. So going right to left on your radio dial across the 4 major attacks. First, let's just talk about malicious apps, right? I mentioned malicious apps are in their own little buckets. As a general rule, until they break out or deliver some kind of an exploit, they're really all about fraud. So here's one example. This was detected by one of our banking customers in the APAC region. In this case, employee downloaded what was a fake BBC app. Looked like the BBC app, sounded like the BBC app, everything else. We immediately detected that it was in fact a fake app, and I'm going to come back to the detection piece here in a quick second. The employee was told, hey, that's a fake app. And they're like, oh, really? All right, they deleted it. When we actually went and looked at it, like most of these malicious apps, it's a framework that could easily be changed. It just so happened it was the BBC. It could have been anybody else. It could have been CNN, could have been whatever the case may be. So, but it was specifically designed to have ads, but it could deliver an exploit. And I'm going to talk about exploits on the next example, which is a different institution, different region completely. But the key part here is there's a lot of conversation about machine learning, a lot of exaggeration potentially about machine learning. We take the term machine learning, deep learning, AI, we take all of those things very seriously. And we've got scientists with PhDs that eat, sleep, and breathe this stuff. We actually even have a white paper up on our website that you can go take a look at that explains our approach to machine learning. Now, we're not going to get down into random forest and next neighbor and all the statistical stuff. We do, but we're not going to put that in a white paper. It's kind of boring. But it does fundamentally explain our approach, and I recommend you go and check it out. One of the things that it says in there is, how do you know if machine learning works? In our mind, there's 3 simple tests. Test number 1 is try it yourself, right? Actually do a POC, get it in the lab, throw stuff at it, all right? That's one. Now, it's also a little bit complicated because you need to have something to throw at it. We don't all have, we do, but a lot of other people don't have, threats sitting around. Test number 2, the update test. If you look at a lot of these solutions, and if they ever finish with things like we detected it and we updated our client and our customers were safe, that means the machine learning is not actually out there and working if they have to update their client for every threat. I'm going to talk about an example of ours on the device exploit here in a minute that will reinforce this update point. The third major test is the law of large numbers. It's specifically in mobile apps. You can do variations of mobile apps and you can make numbers look huge and everything like that. If somebody is saying that they detected a malicious app that had 10 million downloads or 15 million downloads or 20 million downloads, machine learning is not working. This case, fake BBC, we detected this when there was less than 5,000 installations worldwide. So the speed and the law of low numbers in that case reinforces what machine learning is all about. So this actually happened in the APAC region. We looked at it, we stopped it, we got the person to, to uninstall it in this particular case. We identified from the framework it could have delivered an exploit, but it never got a chance because we cut it off too early, not only on this guy's device, but also on other people's devices. Now, chances are with this framework, it probably put itself in and they might have tried it. We haven't, I don't remember if we've seen that framework since. I would have to check with our research guys. But other folks obviously could still be potentially exposed. So here's a different one. I mentioned the end game is always to compromise the device. The laws of security are simple and finite. One of those is persistence. For as long as there's been cybersecurity, the ultimate objective is to remain persistent on the device. Same thing in mobile. The only way you can be persistent on device is if you elevate privileges, if you fundamentally own or have heightened privileges on that device. So in this case, there was an employee, and it is a global bank, but different than the one I was talking about in the APAC region. They had an employee that was actually working in Africa, did not have a lot of Wi-Fi capability. And so whenever the Wi-Fi capability would be coming in, the last thing they were going to do is take time when the few times they were on a Wi-Fi to actually update their device and everything like that. So it was exposed. In this particular case, they were using Android for Work, now known as Android Enterprise. We did a webinar on the BYOD stuff last week. If you want to go back and learn more about the containerized approach of Android for Enterprise. But the fundamental point of this whole thing is, again, if you own the device, anything that's above you, you can control. In this case, the user installed a malicious app on the personal side. Had we not, and then it tried to elevate privileges. As soon as it tried to elevate privileges, we immediately detected it, notified MobileIron. This is before our agent was integrated into MobileIron. And in this particular case, they hadn't transitioned over yet, and prevented it from actually being able to do anything. Had we not been there, had we not been able to detect that elevation of privilege, the fact that they downloaded on the personal side still exposed the Android for Work, Android for Enterprise side, because they would have owned the device. So it's a fundamental point where, again, this is totally untargeted. They weren't targeting the bank. Just so happened this guy downloaded the game, but they could have had access to a major bank by doing this. So another example, and we've done whole webinars on this whole thing, and it actually was has been a driving force in folks adopting ZApp, for instance, to protect their mobile apps. BankBot is basically Android malware. Somebody will actually go to a third-party Google. This is an Android case. Go to a third-party Play Store, get a level or some kind of utility. Unbeknownst to them, when they're doing that, BankBots just socially ask them to elevate privileges. They don't say it in that words, obviously, but they basically say, in order for the blah, blah, blah to function, you need to approve X. And okay, so people say yes because they just went to download it. It actually will, difference between Android and iOS, an app, unless it's an MDM, cannot see other apps that are on the device, no inventory. On Android, every app can see any app that's on there. First thing it does, it looks across and says, hey, I've got 600 and growing banks and other brands that are in my arsenal that I've got. It'll look across and see if any of those things are on there. If it finds one of them, it'll ask the command and control center to send a template. It monitors, and as soon as the user goes to click that app, a fake template is put right on top of it. And the user, of course, gives up their credentials, and then the bad guys go and steal it. And like I said, we've done some webinars on BankBot. You can go back over the last couple of weeks, and we actually have demos of here's how BankBot actually works, and then also demos of here's how ZApp in an app can defend itself against BankBot. But this, again, is another example. From a targeted standpoint, the institution is being targeted, but the users are not. Again, it's they throw out a wide net and they see who's actually going to take the bait. So that's some of number 6 of the mobile menaces, the malicious app. Let's shift over a little bit. Let's go to number 3. Let's go to phishing, right? So mobile phishing is a real issue. It's a huge issue. Just to kind of tee this up for you guys a little bit of a forest point. According to Verizon, 90% of the breaches plus have started with some form of a phishing attack. Well, 2/3 of email are read on mobile. And I think one of the things that's really important about this whole thing is that no matter what corporate protection you have for phishing, part of the email stream, training, everything like that, similar to when I was just talking about the employee of the bank with Android for work, there's nothing on the consumer side. And users are using their mobile device for both personal and professional, just like that elevation of privilege example I just gave on the malicious apps. In this case, the person goes and it's easier to phish somebody on a little device too, because the images don't look the same and it's much easier, smaller text, much more susceptible. So on the personal side, you could go click on this and maybe give up your credentials, but even if you didn't do that, you hit a web page, it gets processed, an exploit can be delivered, which now can expose the corporate side of things. So rather than just give you a full kill chain example like I just did on the others with this would be pretty boring. So I just wanted to show you, the left is the user part, the right is kind of a console, not kind of, it is the Z console that I mentioned earlier. Putting out a kill chain for phishing would be pretty boring. It's like, okay, I clicked the link and then I decided not to go. Or I clicked the link and I was warned, I went anyway, and then any device compromise would be detected. So it's very similar to the malware kill chains, except for the fact that arguably it's even more dangerous because it's easier to send a phishing email than it is to make your way through app stores and everything. And as soon as that website is processing, like I said, it can deliver an exploit. So phishing is a real deal. I mentioned 90% of the attacks begin with a network compromise. The bad guys are going to control the network. Well, it's a family business for mobile menaces number 4 and 5. 5 is man in the middle. It's a normal Wi-Fi network and everything, but there's all sorts of variations where the person in the middle can intercept the traffic, decrypt traffic, insert traffic, etc. So that's man in the middle. He's a really ugly creature, by the way. Don't spend much time looking at his face of that little creature because it is creepy. Then there's bad Wi-Fi, aka rogue access points. Okay. Fundamental point of this is very targeted, and the bad guy controls the network. So here's an example that we detected. Again, this one's happened to be banks. Don't worry, I'm going to pick on different industries here in a minute. In this particular case, again, the hacker set up rogue access points. The banker's employees, most of them would have connected to it directly, but in our case, because of the detection technique that we've got, and again, they own the network right now, so this detection technique was on device, even though it appeared that they were connecting to the bank's network, to the eye or to the device itself. Because one of the things a lot of people don't realize is, as smart as smartphones are, they're really dumb when it comes to the networks they connect to. As a general rule, unless you really go out of your way to change the settings, which most people don't do because the user is the admin of the device, as soon as that device meets a new Wi-Fi network, it will start going through its list of Wi-Fi names it's ever met. And it's up to the network to say yes or no. So what a rogue access point does, for instance, is it just says yes. when you throw out one of your names. So in our case, we noticed that that was in fact the case because Zips was on there. We detected it, disconnected it immediately. Therefore, it was not able to weaponize or anything like that. And behind the scenes, as soon as they went and connected to a different Wi-Fi network that passed it, they were back off and going again. It was all totally automatic. The only thing was they were not able to connect to that bad Wi-Fi network because it was in fact malicious. Even though not one of our customers, this is one that I think really illustrates the case. This is the end of 2017, if I remember correctly. It's October 2017, there we go. Russia was caught. They literally took one of these bad Wi-Fi's, a little menace, number 3 there, or 4, and bolted it onto a drone, flew the drone around a NATO base in Poland, and 4,000 soldiers' phones said, "Hey, are you NATO?" And the drone said, "Yes, we are." And they connected. Cameras were turned on, microphones turned on, troop movements. In the end, the only reason that they got discovered was they started sending fake orders. And eventually people were like, wait a minute, where'd you get that? Now, I think the Russians are very smart at what they do. Something tells me that they already knew that the gig was up. But publicly, what was stated was they were detected by sending these things. Had it been a solution like Zimperium, it would have stopped it right then and there. Back to Zimperium, we have customers, we have a lot of customers in the Silicon Valley. There are buses that are quite often run from San Francisco down into the valley that are free Wi-Fi, free donuts, free coffee, so that folks can live in San Francisco but still work down in the valley. It's a perk, right? Well, one of our customers' phones lit up with Zips and said, "You're connecting to a bad network." And they said, "Well, that's the name of the network that the bus has." Well, we discovered that there was somebody in a Prius driving behind the bus, broadcasting at a higher power than the bus's own Wi-Fi. And all of those folks from all of those high-tech firms were connecting to it, except for ours. And of course, we notified them and they were able to stop it. But that's how easy it is. And that is, again, very targeted. Obviously, the guy knew exactly what he was doing. He was going after IP of some of the largest, most powerful companies in the world by just driving a Prius behind a bus. So pretty interesting stuff. All right, I'm going to roll on because I'm going to make sure that I get to any questions you all may have. So the end game, to be persistent, you want to compromise the device. You want to elevate privileges. The 2 primary ways to do that are rogue profiles and actually exploiting the device down at the OS level. So let's talk about profiles first, okay? A lot of people don't know this, but for Apple has done such an incredible job of locking down the App Store. It is very hard to get a malicious app through the App Store. It's actually pretty hard to get it through the Play Store from Google as well, but Google's got Android has third-party app stores, like I mentioned with BankBot and some of the others, and that's where everybody always goes, right? So it's very hard to get through the App Store on Apple, but in classic Willie Sutton fashion, the gangster from the 1930s, when they asked him, "When are you going to stop robbing banks?" and he said, "When you stop putting money in them," people still want to get on iOS devices. Matter of fact, one could argue that they're higher value targets. When I did the BYOD webinar a few weeks ago, the data clearly supports that executive level folks are highly iOS. Rank and file quite often are much more Android. So, it's not totally set, but the fact is high value targets are quite often on iOS. So they want to get to those people. Well, the thing is Apple years ago created a thing called profiles to elevate privileges of perfectly legitimate apps that needed to be able to see across the device. Perfect examples are an MDM, like our partners, whether it's MobileIron or Microsoft Intune, right? Another example is a VPN, virtual private network. These are things that needed to be operating beyond individual apps. Well, the bad guys have figured this out. And so now the game is to trick people into installing profiles which aren't vetted the same way that the App Store is and get you higher privileges. So a couple examples of this. Both of them happen to be with one partner, one customer of ours who's a consulting firm. First one is this. Consultants all around the world on secure corporate networks, everything on those lines of their clients, because they're consultants, right? Well, a lot of those consultants individually were kind of annoyed that they couldn't get out to some of the things that they wanted to because they're on lockdown private networks of their clients. So one of them, some of them, whatever, discovered a free VPN. It's kind of like a free puppy. You know, it doesn't really exist, right? There is no such thing as free. There's a business model behind anything that somebody just got finished developing. In this particular case, that free VPN enabled them to get out. But what it also did was it installed a profile, of course, because it's a VPN, but that profile was set up to send all of that traffic to a foreign country. So in this case, of course, the consultants had all told each other, hey, here's this way to get out, blah, blah, blah. So it was, when we first came in, this is one of the first things we detected, was this free VPN. Yes, we detected malware, and yes, we detected OS exploit, which I'll talk about right off the bat. But this was everywhere because they had shared it with each other. Totally self-inflicted, not even knowing what they were doing. Another example, kind of similar to the example I talked about with the bank and Android things earlier. Android for work. In this case, there was a consultant down in South America, went to a third-party app store. And you know, people are like, well, you can't get to a third-party app store without jailbreaking your iOS device. Not true. If you go through Safari, you can get to third-party app stores. So in this case, he went there, and he was getting a new game for his iOS. As a part of the installer, it elevated a profile, and it also did this app called Houdini, which started because the profile now had some elevated privileges. It actually was able to read write all the file stuff. And again, had we not detected it and let people know about it, that data was going to another foreign country. So profiles are a real issue, and we're going to be talking more about profiles in upcoming webinars as well. Then there's actually straight up exploiting a device. I'm going a little old school here just because I think it's cool. Stagefright is on Android, was the kind of the big seminal, everybody understands exactly how this happens. When we do our demos, by the way, we exploit iOS just to show people how easy it is to do. But I put Stagefright out here because it's one we're proud of, because our researchers, who are the best mobile threat researchers on the planet, were the ones that detected it. In this case, the way Stagefright operated was there was a media player that when you would receive a text, an MMS text, it would actually start processing the media part of the text even before you open the text, so it would be ready for you when you got there. Well, there was an exploit in that, a hole in that would enable the bad guys to be able to send the text. When the media thing started executing, take advantage of that to inject code down to compromise the device, then erase the text. So this whole thing could occur without, like when you're asleep and you wouldn't even know that it was on there. One of those tech companies I mentioned on the bus example had put zips out because they thought they had seen some of this kind of weird stuff. They discovered several of these things were at risk. We were able to decommission those devices until they were fixed and patched. And then, again, protecting against the exploit. I used to say that if somebody has exploited your device, they've got as much control over your device as you do. That's not true. They have way more capabilities than you do, including, for instance, they own all the keys to the encryption. So they have all access to keychain, for instance, on iOS. They can do cameras, and they can do microphones, all the stuff that we talked about in the Russian drone example. That was all exploit. They were able to take advantage of those things to compromise those devices. I mentioned earlier that there's a couple of tests to run machine learning through. The law of large numbers was the one that I talked about with the fake BBC app. And then I mentioned the other one, which is the update example. Z9, our engine again, has detected every device exploit that has become known, publicly known, some that even haven't been publicly known, but every one that has been publicly known since 2014 on device without an update. Literally the only people that can claim that. That's because we started with the fundamental belief that the end game had to be compromising the device. Then we went to the fact that the bad guys are going to own the network, and then we've been expanding from there. So it just shows the capabilities. So to wrap up, malicious apps, untargeted, can deliver exploits. Phishing, untargeted, can deliver exploits. Network attacks, primary vector to deliver a targeted, and the ultimate objective is an OS exploit or rogue profile, some way of elevating privileges. So with that, thank you all very much for your time. I'm going to take a second and see if we have any questions that have come in. Let me see. Let's see. So here's one question. Was that Android threat in Africa a Stagefright attack? Great question. No, in that particular case, it wasn't. It was a different exploit, and I can't remember the name of the exploit. I'll get back to you on it. But it was not a Stagefright. Great question. And then the other question is outdated Android ? Before I get to the second part, our data shows pretty consistently that 70 to 80% of Android devices are out of date. For those folks that don't know it, Apple controls the development of all the devices, and they control all the relationship with carriers directly. So whenever they create a patch, it can flow through very quickly down to their users. Android has actually, when Google comes out with a fix to any vulnerabilities in the operating system, they have to give it to each one of their manufacturers, Samsung and all the rest of them. And then it's up to each one of them to create a patch for their devices and then have those then pushed out to each carrier. So the whole process is elongated. So generally speaking, about 25 to 30% of iOS devices are out of date because it's still the users deciding when they're going to do it. And about 70, 80% of the Android ones are out of date. But then the question was, is it the SMS MMS based popular breach, which was in practice during Lollipop? I'm not sure I understand the question. I think what I'll do is, how about if the person that was asking the question, I will respond back to in email to make sure I'm getting you the right answer, because I want to make sure I'm understanding it correctly. So with that, in the interest of time, if there's any other questions. Well, thank you all very much. I really appreciate it. My email, by the way, is jt.keating, Keating. If anybody wants to shoot me an email or ask me any other questions. And then the person asking the question about the Lollipop and Stagefright and company, we can swap some emails back and forth or even talk live if it'll help. Everybody, have yourself a great day. Thank you very much for giving us your time.